We're going to go with Andrea Elkon, Judge. Our witnesses.
One more time.
We're switching. We're going to go with Andrea Elkon.
Andrea Alcott.
Elkon.
Okay.
Ms. Lamb is not. She stepped out for a moment. I want
It's your case. It's fine.
keep rolling.
Come on up. Thank you so much. You'll eventually work your way up here. Thank you.
Ms. Warren, if you would please raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give and the matter now pending before this court will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Okay. Please have a seat and introduce yourself to the jurors.
My name is Dr. Andrea Elkon. That's spelled ANDREAELKON.
And what is your profession?
I am a licensed clinical psychologist. I also practice forensic psychology.
What is your educational background?
I earned my bachelor's degree in psychology at Haverford College in Philadelphia. I then went on to earn a master's degree and a PhD at the University of Virginia. While I was at the University of Virginia, I was involved in 2 research labs. One examined various things about youth violence, and the second lab, we were looking at mental health issues among incarcerated women. As part of my PhD, one of the things that I have to do in order to earn that degree is a year of licensed clinical work, where I'm doing nothing but clinical work all year. I did that at the University of South Carolina, and that was specifically a forensic internship. Once I got my PhD, I moved back here to Atlanta, and I spent 2 years in a postdoctoral fellowship where I was focused completely on forensic work as well. And then I earned my license after all of that.
Okay. And you mentioned clinical work, and just break that down, what that means when you do clinical work as opposed to, I think you said, postdoctorate fellowship. What's
Sure. So I'll explain clinical work. So clinical work as a psychologist breaks down into 2 parts. Really, one part is psychological assessment, where we use a series of scientific tests to help us understand a person, really to offer a diagnosis. The second piece is what I would call intervention, and that is therapy, counseling that can be done in groups, in couples, individually. So it's really those 2 pieces.
Therapy as opposed to the testing part.
Yes.
Okay. The testing part is what you're calling clinical. Do I have that right?
I'm calling both clinical.
Clinical
Yes.
means testing and also seeing people.
That's correct.
Okay. Do you work also with people sort of in a one-on-one setting, and is that what we're talking about?
Yes.
You said you did postdoctoral work, and I missed the end of it, so I just wanted to have you redo that. I'm sorry.
Sure. So I completed a postdoctoral fellowship at a private practice down in Stockbridge, Georgia. I was there for 2 years, and that was focused primarily on sexual abuse and sexual offending.
After you finished the postdoctoral fellowship, what was your first, I guess, employment in the field, if you will?
Sure. I was employed by the state of Georgia as a forensic examiner.
Okay. When you work for the state as a forensic examiner, what is it that you do? What are the types of cases that you get? What is the type of work you're doing?
Sure. So I was working in Metro Atlanta, so covering the 5 counties, DeKalb, Fulton, Gwinnett, Newton, and Rockdale, and occasionally Clayton. I would cover those counties where I was conducting court-ordered psychological assessments, so assessments that were ordered by a judge, either because there were concerns that the defendant was so mentally ill that they didn't understand what they'd been charged with or couldn't cooperate with their attorney. The other thing that came up in that role was mental state at the time of the alleged crimes.
Okay, and that's what people typically call not guilty by reason of insanity cases.
That's correct.
Okay. And when you are asked to do those types of assessments, do you have, and did you have situations where people would be, I'm going to use the word faking the not guilty by reason of insanity claim?
Yes.
And is your job at the, when you're working for the state, is your job to ferret that out in part?
Yes.
Okay. And how many evaluations of that nature do you think you did for the state?
Evaluations where a defendant was feigning mental illness?
Specifically, more like how many where they're claiming not guilty by reason of insanity? How many of those, if you have an idea?
I would say I conducted, while I was there, I conducted probably about 1,500 evaluations total, and I would say 25% of them were cases where the defendant was asserting not guilty by reason of insanity.
Okay. Does your current practice now include doing forensic psychological evaluations?
It does.
Okay. How many forensic psychological evaluations have you done?
In my lifetime? In my whole career?
In your whole career?
Oh gosh, over the course of my whole career, I've conducted upwards of 5,000 forensic psychological evaluations.
What does it mean to do a forensic psychological evaluation?
So forensic psychology has to do with the connection between mental health issues and the law. So anytime someone is involved in the legal system, whether that be because of a criminal trial or because of a civil matter, and so civil would be involving money, and an attorney has a concern about either a defendant or a claimant's mental health, then they would call in a forensic psychologist to evaluate that person and say, is this person mentally ill? And is it affecting their ability to participate in legal proceedings somehow?
Are you licensed in the state of Georgia?
I am.
Have you been tendered and accepted as an expert in forensic psychology in Georgia state courts?
Yes, I have.
How many times?
I would estimate approximately 75 times in Georgia courts.
Have you been tendered and accepted as an expert in forensic psychology in federal courts?
Yes, I have.
How many times?
I would estimate approximately 50 times.
At this time, the defense would tender Dr. Andrea Elkon as an expert in forensic psychology.
No objection.
So ordered, members of the jury, as I've explained many times, with any witness, you can believe or not believe the witness. The purpose of an expert witness is to shed light on something that lay people may not otherwise understand. Thank you.
So, have you done forensic evaluations involving post-traumatic stress disorder?
I have.
How many evaluations of post-traumatic stress disorder have you conducted?
I would say of the 5,000 plus I've conducted in my lifetime, close to 3,000 have involved someone talking about PTSD.
Did you work at the Veterans Administration for a period of time as well?
I did.
How many years were you at the Veterans Administration?
7.
What did your work there entail?
While I was at the VA, the only job I had while I was at the VA is to evaluate veterans for their disability claims. So just to educate the court, veterans are entitled to disability benefits if they have some sort of condition that is connected to military service, and if that condition in their present life is impairing their capacity to work.
And so if they're applying for some sort of a benefit or whatever, then they would potentially assign you to do an evaluation to see if they qualify.
If they were claiming a mental health condition, yes.
Okay, only mental health stuff. It's not for anything else.
Correct.
Would one of the claims be sometimes or maybe frequently PTSD?
Yes, I would say that is approximately 90% of the mental health claims in the VA system.
Okay, and you were there for 7 years.
Yes.
How'd you get involved in this case?
I got involved in this case because you contacted me. You had expressed concerns about Ms. Mericle's demeanor, and you requested that a psychologist come and take a look at her and kind of see what I thought.
Did you review did you actually evaluate Ms. Mericle in person?
I did.
How many times did you see her?
It was 3 separate occasions for a total of close to 9 hours.
Other than meeting with Suzanne and those 9 hours you spent directly with her, what other work did you do? What other background materials did you review? And you don't have to list them all, but just give the jury an idea what all you looked at.
Sure. So I looked at all of the police records that were made available to me. I reviewed body camera footage that depicted Ms. Mericle on the night of the incident. I also reviewed text messages between the defendant and the deceased Mr. Barron. I reviewed jail medical records. I interviewed 2 of Ms. Mericle's sisters. I also conducted psychological testing.
Okay. And I want to ask you, I think I'm going to go into what psychological testing you actually gave to her and the types of tests, okay?
Yes.
So walk me through what tests you gave to her and what they mean and how they function.
I administered a series of psychological tests that basically breaks down into 2 categories. Category 1 is an assessment of whether or not the defendant is faking mental illness. Very important to consider in a legal context. The second category was a broader assessment of her psychological functioning, and based on the symptoms that she was reporting within that general assessment of psychological functioning, I also administered tests that specifically examined for symptoms consistent with post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD for short.
Okay, so in other words, you didn't come right in and just give a PTSD test right away?
No.
Okay. That was only after you did the general psychological functioning testing?
Correct, and hours of clinical interviewing as well.
Okay. Talk to me about the first part. You said you did testing for what you called faking of symptoms, or malingering is the medical term, right?
Yes.
Okay. How is it that you test to see if somebody is faking it or giving you correct answers or somehow, tricking you or trying to?
Absolutely. So one of the things that I do is simply administer a clinical interview. So I am just talking with the defendant, trying to learn more about her. And in that, I ask a lot of open-ended questions. So I'm not asking a ton of questions that are yes, no, but more questions that are asking things like, tell me about how you've been feeling. Tell me about your sleep. So I'm not asking really specific things. I'm just eliciting whatever Ms. Mericle had to tell me. And based on that, I can tell whether someone is reciting a textbook almost, like they've read somewhere what the symptoms of an illness are and they're just repeating them back to me, versus someone who is telling me, hey, these things are really going on with me. Here's examples of how these symptoms show up in my life. So if I'm asking about sleep, they might say, and Ms. Mericle said this actually, like, on one hand, I really want to fall asleep. I really try to fall asleep. But then I'm right back up, and then there's no way I'm going back to sleep. And that isn't something you could pull out of a textbook. So already I'm getting a sense that she's responding honestly. But of course, we want to back that up with some scientific tests. So in this case, I administered 2. One was a test that specifically assessed malingering. And when we're looking at malingering, we're looking at a couple of things. When someone is faking mental illness, they will report every single symptom of mental illness that there is. So if I'm asking about all the symptoms of anxiety, for example, do you worry? Yes. Are you having trouble sleeping? Yes. Same with depression. I would say, do you feel sad? Yes. Do you have concentration problems? Yes. And it was all yeses. So that would be somebody who's faking it. The other thing that we look at is the distinction between what someone is reporting and what I can observe. So, or what I've read in medical records. So if someone is saying, I'm nervous and jumpy all the time, but they can sit through 9 hours of interview and just be as calm can be, then there's a difference between what someone is telling me and what they're showing me. And I think that's a really important piece too. The other thing that folks who are faking it will do is report symptoms that they think are mental health symptoms but aren't really mental health symptoms. So the most common one is the experience of someone telling me that they see little green men. That's not a symptom of mental illness. That's not something that actually happens, but somewhere along the way it got into the believers of malingering that is something that you should say. So these tests really look at those things, the difference between reported and observed, whether somebody is just saying, yes, I have every single symptom, or I have every single symptom and it's really bad. And in this case, Miss Mericle was not malingering. So on 2 separate tests, she showed a pattern of responding honestly.
Are the tests that you give, these psychological tests, do they have any tests built into them, fail-safes to catch people if people are trying to fake it, if they're trying to pull the wool over your eyes?
Judge, I apologize. May we approach briefly?
Again, thank you, lawyers, doing their job. Go ahead.
I think we were talking about the general psychological functioning testing that you conducted.
Yes.
And I asked you what fail-safes are built into that psychological testing.
So I believe the test you're referring to is called the Minnesota Multiphasic Personality Inventory, or MMPI. This is a really old psychological test that's been revised a number of times to keep up with modern populations. It's a 335-item true-false test. The wonderful thing about this test, and the reason why it is the most frequently used in the scientific community, is because it has safeguards built into it. So we can know from this test whether or not someone is putting in a reasonable amount of effort, whether or not someone is responding randomly, whether or not someone is exaggerating their mental health symptoms, or whether someone is actually underreporting mental health symptoms. So we have all this extra information that we get about someone in addition to their mental health symptoms.
What were the results of this general psychological functioning that led you to go into step 3, which you testified about as the specific PTSD testing?
Yes. So based on this test, Ms. Mericle endorsed clinically significant numbers of both health complaints, things like concentration issues, memory problems, pain, things like that, and clinically significant numbers of symptoms that are most frequently associated with PTSD.
And after you got those results back that had those markers, for
Yes.
lack of a term,
Yes.
did you make a decision then to go on to further testing?
Yes, I thought that based on the results of this initial test, which is true-false, that I wanted more information about symptoms associated with post-traumatic stress.
Was there any other, we've talked about your interviews with Ms. Mericle, your face-to-faces.
Yes.
Were you pulling from any other documentary evidence to help you steer in that direction?
Besides my interviews and the MMPI before I administered any other kind of testing?
Maybe you did that after, so tell me, I'm not sure.
So I had reviewed all of what's called the collateral data, so the body camera footage and the police reports and investigative interviews. I had reviewed all of that prior to meeting with Ms. Mericle, and then I interviewed her, and then the next step is to administer tests, the more general ones, the assessments of effort and of honesty, and then going into a more thorough assessment where I'm asking about PTSD.
Tell me and tell us what the PTSD testing, what it's called, and what it consists of, and what the results were.
Absolutely. And it's probably helpful before I do that, just to give you a little explanation of what PTSD is. That's a term that gets thrown around a lot in the self-help literature or on Instagram. And so I thought I'd just go back a little bit and maybe educate everyone about what PTSD is in the clinical sense.
Thank you.
So in order to be diagnosed with PTSD, someone has to have experienced a trauma as defined by the psychiatric and psychological community. And the way that's defined is someone who has directly experienced a life-threatening event or a direct threat to their safety. The other way that someone might experience PTSD is if they've witnessed something like that. So they've witnessed someone else's life being in danger or a threat to that person's safety. But the point is that it has to be life-threatening or safety-threatening. It can't be, my boss yelled at me at work. Yes.
Let me make sure I got this right.
Sure.
In order for a person to be diagnosed, meaning by the psychological community,
Yes.
this person has PTSD, they have to have directly experienced a life-threatening event, or potentially they saw someone else have that.
That's correct.
Okay.
That's correct.
How is it that there's a way to tell that they meet the definition, basically?
So it kind of goes stepwise. So in order to diagnose PTSD, there has to be a trauma. And then from there, the symptoms fall into 4 categories. So what happens when someone experiences PTSD or when someone has a trauma, our fight or flight response kicks in. And the fight or flight response is what happens in every single animal, humans included, when we get scared or when we perceive a threat. What happens is our fight or flight mechanism goes on, and that is both a psychological response, so there's an emotional response, and there's a physical response. And it prepares us to respond to the threat, either by getting the heck out of there or by fighting back, and in some instances, by freezing. And what happens with PTSD... Say
those again. You said one of them was freezing.
Correct.
Meaning they don't move at all.
Correct.
And then one of them is fighting.
Yes.
And then the other one's flight.
Yes.
Meaning run.
Yes.
Okay.
Escape. Absolutely. So what happens when someone has post-traumatic stress disorder is that fight or flight switch stays on. And so the trauma does not recede into this person's memory, but rather the person who experiences trauma, it's like it's happening in real time over and over again. So what happens when someone's experiencing PTSD, they will have what's called re-experiencing symptoms, where they are reliving the trauma either through dreams or through memories that just kind of come into their head when they don't want them there, or through what's called flashbacks, where they actually believe that they are back in the situation. Or there will be some trigger, whether that's a smell or a sound or the sight of a particular person, where they have that fight or flight response all over again. The second category of symptoms is avoidance. So when we feel bad, the thing we want to do is get away from it. We don't want to think about bad memories. We don't want to have them around. We don't want to talk about them. And so folks with PTSD will go to great lengths to avoid thinking about, talking about, feeling anything related to the traumatic experience. Sometimes these people...
It seems like,
yes.
What if the person is in a relationship with someone and the thing that's negative happened within that relationship, is that something they're going to even avoid talking about in that relationship?
Yes,
That's part of the problem, basically.
yes,
You said the switch stays on when
Yes.
when you have this exposure to the life-threatening event.
that's correct.
And how does that play into a person's ability to sleep?
So that category of symptoms is called hyperarousal. So because this fight or flight switch is constantly on, someone thinks they're in danger 24/7. And of course, when we think we're in danger 24/7, you don't sleep well. You're kind of agitated and on edge all the time. You might startle to loud noises, so you're just kind of jumpy. Some folks can be what's called hypervigilant, where they're constantly looking over their shoulder or checking for the exits. I often had veterans who would say when they sat down in a restaurant, they had to know where all the exits were before they could be comfortable. Those are what's called hyperarousal symptoms.
Would we see, let's say, examples of that person sending, late night texts past midnight, 2 a.m., 3 a.m., stuff like that?
Yes, it would be this chronic pattern of sleeplessness and just an agitated, like constant agitation.
Okay. So I didn't mean to interrupt you. You said re-experiencing, avoidance, hypervigilance.
And then the fourth category is that PTSD essentially changes how we think and how we feel. So when someone's been through trauma, they start to think that the world is a much more dangerous place, that people are dangerous, people are not to be trusted, that they, again, don't want to talk to anybody. They often blame themselves. Trauma is so nonsensical, and there often isn't a why. And so survivors of trauma will often blame themselves for any of the things that happen to them, because that's the only conclusion they can come up with. And of course, if someone is blaming themselves all the time, they feel pretty depressed.
If they're blaming themselves, if they're in this aspect of the I guess, the disease, the mental disease they're living with, is that going to also be something you might see in some of their communications, taking blame for things that may not be their fault?
Yes.
You've got re-experiencing, there's avoidance, there's hypervigilance, and you titled the last one, and I didn't get it, I'm sorry.
Negative changes in how we think and feel.
Okay. Would someone experiencing negative changes in how they think and feel, would that be something that people on the outside of them might notice, like friends, family, things like that?
Yes, they would notice things like maybe social withdrawal, that they're just not talking as much anymore, they're not socializing as much anymore, just seem more down.
Would they necessarily hear from that person about what the trauma was? Meaning, would they be told, what's actually going on?
No, because back to the avoidance piece, people who have experienced trauma do not want to talk about it.
Did you have experience at the Veterans Administration and in your work at Georgia Regional and in your education with intimate partner violence?
Yes.
How much, give me an idea of how many persons you've seen that have experienced intimate partner violence and treated and evaluated?
So if we say that, let's say, I would say maybe 35% of the evaluations I conducted at the VA were women who had been in the military. The incidence of intimate partner violence among female veterans is upwards of 85%. So I say that almost every woman who I interviewed in the context of the VA had experienced some sort of intimate partner violence.
Did sometimes those intimate partner violence matters also sort of coincide with a PTSD diagnosis or a PTSD case? Are they always there or not?
Meaning that somebody who has experienced intimate partner violence, do they necessarily get a diagnosis of PTSD?
Exactly.
No.
And tell me why they wouldn't automatically be PTSD. They've experienced some sort of trauma, perhaps.
That's
Would they
correct.
not present to you, meaning they wouldn't test out as having PTSD?
Well, the most simple answer is that our brains are incredibly tough and our brains are incredibly resilient. So that most people who have experienced trauma over time, even with no treatment at all, will not go on to develop symptoms of PTSD. That the incidence of PTSD among combat veterans, for example, is about 10%.
So we don't know, in other words, why some people end up with it and some people don't, even though they've been exposed to the same sorts of...
That's a really long answer and a really complicated one, and I don't want to bore the jury.
Sorry.
But there are some individual factors that play into it, historical factors, just kind of general psychological makeup. The research is very much active as to figuring out who's more vulnerable to PTSD than others.
I meant to ask you this earlier. Have you testified for both have you testified as an expert for the state?
Yes.
What percentage of the time that you've been called to court to testify as a forensic psychological expert, what percentage of the time have you been testifying for the government?
75% of the time.
Have you had cases where you've been testifying for the government against a defendant who's claiming that they have PTSD and you found that they didn't?
That's correct, yes.
And help us understand how you can discern this person doesn't have it and that Ms. Mericle does.
Sure. So in that was another case of intimate partner violence. The defendant was actually a man. He, in that particular case that I'm talking about, the only symptom that he ever came up with was, I have flashbacks. Couldn't describe flashbacks, couldn't tell me what happens, didn't spontaneously report any other symptoms of anxiety. I met with him on several occasions, and he too was calm, collected, but insisted that these flashbacks amounted to PTSD. It just wasn't the case.
In Ms. Mericle's case, did you, in your evaluations of her and testing of her, did you find anything to suggest that she was in any way faking to you that she has PTSD?
No.
And let's go ahead and finish up with the PTSD testing that you gave her in your results, okay?
Sure. So to follow up on all of the just kind of general interviewing that I did with Ms. Mericle, I also administered what's called a structured clinical interview. So that's essentially a script where I'm bound to ask very specific questions about PTSD symptoms, and then Ms. Mericle's responses are scored. This is a test that's put out by the National Center for PTSD. I had to get a lot of training on it to make sure that I was asking the questions correctly and scoring the responses correctly. So this test is called the CAPS, and it takes about an hour to administer, and we basically go one by one through all the different symptoms of PTSD, and I ask for a lot of detail. I would always save this kind of test for later on in my evaluation of a client because we're bringing up so much sensitive material that folks usually don't want to talk about.
And what were the results from Ms. Mericle's PTSD testing as well as her other tests that you conducted?
So her entire presentation was consistent with a clinical diagnosis of post-traumatic stress disorder.
Once you have gotten the results back from all the testing and you have concluded that she presents as PTSD, what does that tell us as far as the source or the potential source of the PTSD symptoms that she has?
So as part of the CAPS that I administer, the first thing that we do is go through a series of traumatic events. So just a general questionnaire, has this happened to you, has this happened to you? And you have the option to say, yes, this happened to me, or I witnessed it. After going through that questionnaire, I will ask the respondent, I will ask them, okay, now tell me, of all these things, what is the worst trauma you've ever experienced? And that's called an index trauma, or the most horrible memory that they have.
And in this case, the index trauma that was reported to you was what?
Was Mr. Barron pointing a gun in Miss Mericle's face and telling her that she better not close her eyes tonight.
And that was reported to you as having occurred on the March 7th, March 8th event.
That's correct.
Is the index trauma when we call it index trauma, we're saying this is our likely source of PTSD, or this is just the most powerful reported source?
Both. I mean, it's the most likely source of her symptoms.
Did she report to you that she had any post-traumatic stress disorder symptoms that arose prior to March the 7th?
She did.
And what were those symptoms?
The symptoms that she was reporting prior to that night really had to do with a heightened state of anxiety, feeling nervous all the time, having some nightmares, and generally not sleeping well.
Did she recount to you the nature of the nightmares? What was, I guess the topic of the nightmares that she was having?
So the nightmares that she was having at the time I interviewed her, the nightmares involved the index trauma itself. So she was having nightmares in which Mr. Barron was coming after her with the gun.
Did you review any collateral information where Miss Mericle was reporting these symptoms prior to you ever having gone to see her? Specifically related to the other counseling sessions that she'd had?
Yes, so she had reported in to her jail counselors. Both reported and jail staff observed mental health symptoms.
When someone is, I guess, faking mental health symptoms, is there generally something that they're wanting from that?
Yes.
Okay, what is that?
So the technical term is secondary gain. So in a criminal setting, that might be that if the person is incarcerated, they might want to fake mental health symptoms to move to different housing that they perceive as better. They might be doing it for the purpose of a lesser sentence or an acquittal. In the civil setting, someone might be faking mental illness for the purpose of money or not working or both.
Did you see any indication in the materials involving Miss Mericle that she was using these reported symptoms that happened before you ever got involved to try to do something with respect to medical?
No, to the contrary, she was showing so much distress at the jail that jail staff offered to move her to medical housing, and she declined the housing. She didn't want to go.
Is that consistent or inconsistent with malingering or faking?
So it's inconsistent with faking. It's consistent with honest mental health symptoms.
Did you review the body cameras of the initial responding officers?
Yes.
And is there anything on those body cameras specifically with respect to treatment from EMS or anything else that is consistent or inconsistent with malingering?
Yes, so on the night of the offense, on the body camera footage, EMS is concerned about Miss Mericle having a panic attack. They're concerned about elevated heart rate, elevated blood pressure. They offer repeatedly, really, for her to go to the hospital. Hey, you should go get this checked out. And she declines repeatedly. And so that would be inconsistent with malingering, very consistent with honest reporting.
Did you notice anything else in the body cameras that would be suggestive of a consistent mental health issue outside of the home there on the body cameras?
Yes, so Miss Mericle's behavior as observed on the body camera footage is incredibly consistent with what happens when somebody has just experienced a traumatic event. There was an inability to calm down. There was emotions going up and down, hyperventilating, throwing up at one point. All of these symptoms, again, if we're thinking about that fight or flight switch and it is on high alert and really hasn't come down yet, we are seeing the emotional and physical overload of that throughout the entire duration of the body camera footage.
Would her behavior on the body camera be consistent with an acute stress response to something very recently occurring?
Yes.
Did you notice anything? Well, let me ask you this. When you treat patients in your office who are people who have PTSD,
Yes.
is there some physical responses, some physical manifestations that those patients will actually express and that you see, and that's consistent with what you see from Ms. Mericle?
Yes. So the treatment for PTSD is pretty intense, and it involves revisiting the traumatic experience over and over and over. So in the therapeutic setting, my clients who are diagnosed with PTSD, I'm having them in this structured setting repeat the trauma in real time over and over and over again. The point is to move the memory of that trauma back in its rightful place so that it doesn't feel like we're re-experiencing it in real time. And that is a really, really challenging process. And the clients who come get treatment for PTSD are incredibly brave because it's just so difficult. Because especially in the initial retellings of the traumatic event, we see those physiologic symptoms, those physical symptoms happening all over again. I often keep a bucket close to the chair because I will often have clients throw up. I will often have clients have panic attacks, that we see these symptoms and we just have to work to regulate through them in therapy, but it's a pretty tough process.
Did you notice in the interview with the police where Ms. Mericle keeps saying that it's hot and unzipping her, I guess it's a fleece or whatever? Did you notice that in the interview?
Yes, I did.
Is that consistent or inconsistent with a trauma response?
That is consistent. That's part of the physical reaction, is that anxiety and the threat response makes us super hot. We start sweating profusely.
It seemed to be on the body camera, and you correct me if I'm wrong, but that it was almost like she would say something in a certain state of mind and then go into a different state of mind and then get elevated, then come back down. Did you notice that on the cameras?
I did.
Is that consistent or inconsistent with an acute trauma response?
That's consistent because what is so challenging when someone has just very recently been through trauma is that we're not regulating our emotions real well, that our brain is on overload. This life-threatening thing just happened, and the brain is working double time to try and regulate, but it's not going that well. So we'll see periods of calm and then periods of hyperventilating, and that's perfectly consistent with a stress response.
I think you used a term for me before. The word was labile.
Yes.
Okay, what is that?
Emotional lability or labile means that emotions are up, down, all over the place. People who have really labile emotions basically go from 0 to 60 like that they're just very, very quick to get emotional and often just as quick to calm down. It's just up and down, up and down. It's exhausting for the person who's experiencing it.
Is that sort of up and down emotional swing, is that consistent or inconsistent with a acute stress response to trauma?
It's consistent.
Is someone who is, I guess, faking a trauma response, let's say, are they typically capable of keeping that going for a very long period of time?
No. Someone who is faking any kind of mental health condition, that's one of the ways that we know that they are faking a mental health condition, because they can't keep up the act. That they'll try it for a few minutes, but then will inadvertently slip back into being themselves.
And you've reviewed the 3 hours or so of the body camera. Are you even familiar if somebody ever being able to do that for such a long period of time if it's not actually happening?
No, I've never seen that.
Have you ever heard of if someone doesn't close their eyes, that means they're faking a panic attack? Have you ever heard that before?
No,
Is that a medically correct conclusion?
not at all. And in fact, quite the opposite. When someone's having a panic attack, they usually have their eyes wide open because it's a fear response.
I wanted to ask you about the elevated heart rate that the EMS folks found from Ms. Mericle when they were treating her outside of the, on the front porch there.
Yes,
Is that consistent or inconsistent with a trauma response?
consistent.
And again, if she is faking it and trying to get out of the situation, and they've offered her, hey, let's go to the hospital, would she be more or less likely to accept that offer?
If she were faking mental health symptoms, she would want to go to the hospital.
Is her declining that treatment consistent or inconsistent with faking it?
Inconsistent with faking it.
Have you reviewed the 4,000 pages of text messages that we sent you?
I absolutely have.
Okay. And I mean the messages from Mr. Barron and Miss Mericle.
Yes.
Okay. Is it consistent or inconsistent with intimate partner violence for the victim in an intimate partner violence relationship to be jealous?
Yes.
It is inconsistent for the victim to be jealous?
It's consistent for the victim to be jealous.
It seems, and you're going to have to help me out with that, because it seems like if I'm frightened of someone because they're violent with me, that I wouldn't dare ever mention something like, hey, you cheated on me, or, how dare you do this with this woman, things like that. Help me understand that.
Absolutely. So the intimate partner violence is so complicated. Like any relationship is messy, but relationships that involve intimate partner violence are really messy because they involve the power dynamics where one partner is coercing, meaning that they're getting the partner to do a bunch of things she doesn't want to do, and controlling the person in various ways. Sometimes that's through physical threats, sometimes that's through financial, sometimes that's through emotional abuse, like calling someone a name. But the purpose is to establish a power differential and prevent that person from thinking she has any other options but to be in that relationship. So what we see in intimate partner violent relationships that include intimate partner violence, is that we will see the survivors of those relationships sometimes behave erratically. So sometimes make efforts to really hang on to this person, sometimes get angry to sort of test the waters, or sometimes to get attention. But we don't see a consistent pattern of behavior all the time. So someone who is in a relationship where there is abuse and then finds out that that person is cheating might actually confront that person because that's a socially acceptable thing to do. That is not a person who is in the relationship. That's something where the survivor might not blame herself. She might think that that's something that the perpetrator is doing all on their own.
Did you see evidence in your review of the text messages, the voluminous text messages, of coercion and control?
Yes.
Can you talk to me about what evidence you saw and that you noted?
So in the early stages of the relationship, I think I also want to point out that abusive relationships don't usually start out abusive. They start out with charm, with love, with lust, that there's usually the excitement at the beginning of the relationship, and slowly but surely the perpetrator is taking more and more steps to control this person. And what I saw early on in the text messages as the relationship was in its maybe third or fourth month is a lot more argument about finances. Mr. Barron was wanting Miss Mericle to sell her practice, and she was feeling very on the fence about it. She talks a lot about how she's always been independent. She's always worked. She's always made her own money. And it seemed like there was a lot of pressure for her to sell that practice, to have more money kind of in the pot. And that's something that she talked about in her interviews too, is that one of the things that she and Mr. Barron fought about frequently was money, that him wanting her to use her money in ways that she didn't feel comfortable with.
Is getting into a large mortgage with someone part of, or can it be part of, a tactic of coercion and control?
Absolutely.
Can other, you've already talked about emotional abuse that would just be sort of like insults and things like that.
Calling bad names, degrading, yeah.
What about flirting with somebody in front of the other partner openly?
Yes, to make the partner feel less than.
Is it consistent or inconsistent with coercion and control and intimate partner violence for, at the beginning, the perpetrator is very, very kind, very, very nice, seems to be a Prince Charming, the relationship moves very, very fast?
That is completely consistent. Again, these relationships don't usually start out bad. They usually start out exciting.
Talk to me about how it is that it can change, and what it is that starts to change things in a typical coercion and control intimate partner violence situation.
Well, it typically doesn't start with physical violence. It starts with more of the degradation, name calling, pulling the person away from their network, so more isolation, more situations to create a sense of dependency so that the survivor is dependent on the perpetrator.
Can you walk us through the prior, I guess, the violence that was reported to you and that you laid out in your report with respect to Mr. Barron and Ms. Mericle?
Yes. So in terms of when the physical violence started, Ms. Mericle reports it was maybe around September or October of 2024. In terms of collateral data to support that, there are some text messages that match up with Ms. Mericle's report, but it isn't like we have text messages, and I wouldn't expect to see text messages where it's like, oh my God, you hit me.
And let me stop
Yes.
you and ask you about that.
Sure.
Is it common that in a violent relationship that they don't openly communicate about the violence in text messages? Is that a common thing?
That's the most common, yes.
That's more common than actually, hey, I beat you up, you beat me up, you hurt me.
That's correct.
Okay. And did you find in the 4,000 pages or so any, open statements by either of the parties? You hurt me, you did this to me. Anything really express?
Yes, and that was much later in the relationship. So
Jump ahead, sorry.
yeah,
Go back,
so that
go
was
back.
much later. Ms. Mericle suggested that the violence really escalated around late December of 2024. That was the time at which she inadvertently found out about the other woman.
That was late December.
Late December 2024.
28, 24 sound right?
That's correct.
Okay, go ahead.
And that was the first fight, per her report, that was the first fight that involved weapons, where guns were brandished.
Okay. And to be super, super clear, the earlier September thing was not weapons, but it involved
some sort of violence. Ms. Mericle is reporting hair pulling, calling her a whore, slamming her against a wall.
Well, check and I want to make sure we get this right, the earlier September, October violence was physical violence?
Sexual violence.
And sexual violence, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Now we go forward to, I think you said December.
Correct.
Tell us about that one.
Correct. So Ms. Mericle reports at that time that there was an escalation, and there was really an escalation around the fact that there was this other woman to whom Mr. Barron was sending money. And that was the first time that the fighting escalated to where he brandished a gun.
And is this the one where she's in the closet and makes a phone call to, I think, Mr. Barron's son?
To Mr. Barron's son, that's correct.
Now, what was the next one as far as you have in your notes?
So the next time there was any incident of what I would consider violent behavior was in January of 2025. And that was an incident, again, where there was an escalation in fighting around this other woman, and Mr. Barron chucks Ms. Mericle's purse out the window, which is an act of aggression, in my opinion.
Is that consistent or inconsistent with intimate partner violence, that behavior of throwing a cherished personal item away or throwing it out the window?
That's consistent with intimate partner violence.
And first of all, was that incident also confirmed and by collateral material in the text?
Yes, that one was confirmed by text messages in which Ms. Mericle tells Mr. Barron, hey, my phone was in there, my hearing aid charger was in there, my ID was in there, my money was in there, and he had just thrown it out the window.
Okay, and then moving on from there?
Moving on from there, the next incident was an incident in early February when Mr. Barron reportedly came to visit Ms. Mericle on St. Simon's Island so they could talk things out about this other woman.
And is this the incident that involved the police?
Correct.
Okay. Did you watch the body cameras from the St. Simon's incident where the police appeared?
Yes, I did.
Did you see anything on the body cameras that is the hallmark or very consistent with intimate partner violence?
Yes. The thing that was readily apparent to me on the body camera footage was when Ms. Mericle is shown stepping outside of the apartment, the door, she's talking to police, and the police officer asks her something to the effect of, did he hurt you? And what Ms. Mericle does is, without saying a word, she takes the police officer's hand and she places it on the back of her head. So she's trying to tell the police officer without telling the police officer, hey, something's going on here.
In other words, verbally she's saying nothing, but she's demonstrating it.
Correct.
And is that something that is consistent with intimate partner violence?
It absolutely is, and especially because Mr. Barron was essentially right there.
Moving on to the beyond that St. Simon's incident, what was the next incident? What was the next incident that was reported to you?
So the next incident that was reported to me was in mid-January, shortly after Valentine's Day, mid-January of 2025.
Mid-February.
February, I'm so sorry. February of 2025, where Ms. Mericle and Mr. Barron reportedly got into a fight, some combination of money. She reported to me that there was a fight around money and how she was going to use money from selling her practice. And also, again, this third woman, or this other woman, second woman, was also involved. And that was another big fight in which there was a gun. Ms. Mericle reported that Mr. Barron was tapping her foot with a gun, that he beat her up, that he was hitting her around her chest. She said she looked like an MMA fighter, but all of the bruising she reports was around her torso.
Meaning not on a visible part of her body.
Correct.
tell me if that is consistent or inconsistent with intimate partner violence for a perpetrator to select a portion of the victim's body that is not openly viewable by other folks.
That's correct. That's consistent with intimate partner violence.
Did Ms. Mericle relate to you the incident from the March 7th? Obviously, the matter in which she's charged as well.
Yes.
Okay. Did she relate to you a suicide attempt after the unfortunate death of Mr. Barron?
Yes. She said she thought about taking her own life.
You said before that persons who are having a trauma response are going to have some sort of, maybe this is related to the intimate partner violence, but the sort of the shame or the guilt or the self-blame.
Yes.
Okay. Is that related to a PTSD? Is that a PTSD response? Is it an intimate partner violence response, or is it both?
It's both. It's both. It is part of what keeps a survivor of intimate partner violence in the abusive relationship, is that they think they're at fault. And in Ms. Mericle's case, she was reporting over and over again in her interviews with me that she just felt like she wasn't doing enough. She wasn't doing enough to make him love her. And why didn't he love her? And if she had just tried harder, if she had just done things differently, I mean, she really weathered the blame for their relationship not going well. And that is largely why she stayed in it.
But it seems like she would be stating in the texts, something about his violence, doesn't that? Why are the texts all about Lilia Bocan, right? Why are they all about this and trying to get his attention? Like, why would you want the attention of someone who's violent with you?
It goes back to the power dynamic. I mean, in terms of the text with Lilia, that was just an easier way to fight with him. I guess I would say that it is easier to fight about a third party than it is that, hey, this traumatic thing is actually happening to me. Because, again, like we talked about, someone who has experienced trauma doesn't want to talk about it and won't typically bring it up to their abuser, that's happening. So this felt like a safer thing. It's also, quite frankly, a perfectly reasonable thing to be angry about if you're in a committed relationship.
Meaning that, look, you bought a $1.59 million house with a man and he didn't have the mortgage 1 month, and all of a sudden you find out he's giving money to somebody else. You're saying that's not necessarily unreasonable to be upset about that.
Correct.
Would someone who is wanting this attention, more of the attention from the abuser, would they be willing to sort of make up stuff and tell that person anything for more attention?
Absolutely.
Like, I'm hurt, or I'm going to the doctor, or I've got a medical condition that I may not have.
Absolutely. And we see this a lot in intimate partner violent relationships, and also with parent and children relationships where the parent is abusive or neglectful, that the survivor, the victim of the abuse, often comes to believe, well, any attention is better than no attention at all. And so they sometimes act in ways that are not in their own best interest to solicit that attention.
Talk to me about if someone has been the victim of sexual violence. Okay, have you worked with sexual violence survivors?
Yes.
And have you worked with them in the context of intimate partner violence?
Yes.
And also in PTSD?
Yes.
Okay. If someone has had an act of sexual violence visited upon them, what are the potential responses that they might have after that event with respect to sex?
So it usually goes one of two ways. Either the victim of intimate partner violence will avoid sex altogether, go to great lengths to avoid sex, or alternatively, become very solicitous of sex. And that really comes down to that women who have been sexually assaulted or men who have been sexually assaulted come to believe that their sexuality is what makes them worthwhile. That's what makes them lovable. And so they really lean into that even in ways that are not in their best interest.
Did you find evidence of that in the communications with Ms. Mericle and this other individual, Mr. English?
Yes, with Ms. Mericle and with Mr. English, and also with Ms. Mericle and Mr. Barron.
Would it be inconsistent for someone who has been a victim of sexual violence to have consensual sex with the person who has previously perpetrated an act of sexual violence?
That would be perfectly, I would expect that, even in a relationship that's abusive.
Would it be inconsistent with someone who's been a victim of sexual violence to want to sext or talk on the phone in a sexual way with the perpetrator of the prior sexual violence?
So someone who is the victim may be solicitous of that. Again, believing that that's where their worth lies, is in that solicitation of sex.
I wanted to talk to you now about the DUI arrest, okay?
Yes.
And specifically, talk to you about defendants. I think it's State's Exhibit. Did you examine the notes that Ms. Mericle has, the note that Ms. Mericle has about what occurred on the DUI arrest night?
Yes, it was a note from her phone.
Yes. Is that note consistent with intimate partner violence, in your opinion?
In my opinion, it is consistent with intimate partner violence because the note appears as if she is rehearsing a version of events in which the perpetrator is not at all involved.
In other words, do victims of violence, whether it be sexual or whatever, do they try to create a script that they will stick to in order to not mention or not expose the perpetrator?
That's correct.
Did you examine text messages related to the St. Simon's incident between Mr. Barron, and Ms. Mericle?
I did.
Did you find evidence of a rehearsal in those messages as well?
Yes, I did.
And is that rehearsal, again, consistent with intimate partner violence and behavior by victims?
It is. The way that Ms. Mericle is rehearsing in those text messages is repeatedly saying, I fell and hit my head, you did nothing wrong. And there's a repetition of that.
I want to talk to you now about the symptoms that we might expect someone who is suffering an acute stress response to exhibit.
Sure.
Okay? If someone has experienced an incredibly traumatic event and they're having an acute stress response, what physical manifestations would we expect to find?
So in an acute stress response, what we think about is what happens when we get scared. When we get scared physically, our heart starts racing faster, we start breathing much more rapidly, we start sweating, shaking, sometimes we get a nervous stomach, and sometimes we get so sick that we want to throw up. But think about, so this isn't just being scared, this is way the next level. This is traumatized. So it's all those symptoms that we've all experienced when we've been scared times a million.
So in other words, if I'm scared, I might normally be a little bit jumpy or a little shaky, but this is going to be well elevated beyond that.
Extreme, yes.
Is a person who's experiencing an acute stress response, might their hand shake?
Yes.
Are they going to be capable of, would you say, taking a very good aim at a target with a pistol?
I can't imagine they would be.
Now talk to me about specifically post-traumatic stress disorder, okay? If someone is suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder, how if at all, does it affect their threat perception?
So when someone is in any elevated state of stress, including being diagnosed with PTSD, in their minds, they're in a constant state of threat.
And if they're, in other words, if someone is not immediately charging down on them with a weapon, right, normal folks would be frightened in that instance, I would assume, correct?
Yes.
If someone is not having that immediate threat, but they have a stress disorder, what might they perceive about the imminence of a threat that's different from a normal folk?
So if someone has been previously threatened with a weapon and then aren't currently being threatened with the weapon, that doesn't mean that they still don't believe that they're being threatened. The threat still feels incredibly imminent.
Okay. Meaning if someone was to assault someone else with a firearm and then retreat behind a door, the person who's outside might still be feeling that that is an imminent threat, even though it may not be in that very moment.
That's absolutely correct.
Those are all my questions. Thank you.
Judge, may we approve? Dr. Elkon,
Yes.
how much were you paid by defense? How much were you paid to be retained by defense?
I charge $400 an hour.
And so, what's that total? Up until you had to come into court to testify, what was that total?
Oh, I'm not sure. I don't have the total right in front of me. I apologize.
So $400 an hour, so that's 9 hours of interviewing the defendant, correct?
Yes.
So 400 per hour of that, correct?
Yes.
Because I'm terrible at math. I'm gonna get a calculator. So 400 times 9, so that's $3,600 just for your interviews with the defendant, correct?
Yes.
And then, besides interviewing with the defendant, you spoke with Dana Gardner for about an hour, correct?
That's correct.
So that would be 4,000. You interviewed Leslie, who's also her sister, correct?
That's correct.
So that was an hour and 25 minutes. How do we do that billing?
Sorry?
Is it like $400 plus like the, is it like, if you do an hour and 25 minutes, what would you bill for that?
Whatever a quarter of 400 is, so 100.
So we'll do $500 for that. As far as so the body cam, that was 3 hours it took you to review, correct?
That's correct.
So that would be another $1,200. So now we're at $5,700. How long did it take you to review the indictment and the incident report?
Probably about an hour.
So another $400. How about, do you remember how much you billed to review like the other evidence in the case that you were given, about how long that took you to review?
Another 4 hours.
So $7,700 is the math. Is there anything else that, like, how about the psychological testing? Is that all included in the 9 hours that you met with the defendant?
That's correct.
Is there anything else I'm missing prior to like showing up today? Like, did you have to review notes or anything like that that you billed for?
So the other piece of it, and this is where it gets a little complicated, is that when I am retained by the defense, I say, I'll go take a look. I can't guarantee you're going to like what I have to say. So So after that initial stage that you just mentioned, the next thing I do is I come back to the defense and say, here's what I found. I'm going to go ahead and write this report.
Okay. So I would imagine it probably took you a little bit to write your report for this case, correct?
That's correct.
So about how long do you think that you probably billed for writing the report?
8 hours.
So now we're at $10,900. How about talking with Mr. Willis? Did you bill for your time to speak with the defense attorney about your findings?
Yes,
How many hours did you spend doing that?
about 4 total.
So now we're at $12,500. Am I missing anything else?
I don't think so.
So now we're talking, so that's about $12,500 prior to your testimony.
Yes.
So do you start billing for your testimony from the time you get, like, driving to the courthouse, waiting to testify, and then also testifying?
That's correct.
So what are we at as of where we sit right now? It's 5:24. How many hours are you going to bill for today so far?
Starting at 10:30 this morning.
Oh, goodness. 10:30, 11:30, 12:30, 1:30, 2:30. About 7 hours?
That's correct.
Okay, so another 7 hours. So now we're at $15,300
Okay,
and counting, correct?
that's correct.
Okay. So maybe Mr. Willis is hoping I talk fast so the clock stops at some point soon. So I want to talk to you about some of the things that you reviewed aside from your interviews with, I'm sorry, I have another quick question. Talking about all the hours you spent on this case, I actually also called you to try and speak with you about your report, correct?
Yes,
And you would not speak with me, correct?
that's correct.
And you basically told me that you were hired by defense and so you weren't going to speak with me about your report, correct?
My concern about the questions that you were asking me is that I felt that you were starting to ask me questions to try and get me to give you testimony over the phone. Now, it's very clear from my report and the report that you had, it's very clear that my opinion is consistent with what the defense is asserting. And so I didn't think it was appropriate to give you testimony when I know that the prosecution is adverse to anything I have to say. So I didn't want any behind the closed doors gotchas. I wanted any testimony that you ask me to be asked in front of the jury in open court.
And I simply just said I wanted to talk to you about your report, and your response to me was, I'm not going to talk to you about my report, correct?
That is not what I said. I only started to say that when you were asking me questions about what do I do when I assess for malingering. That is the point at which I said I'm not comfortable answering any substantive questions about my testimony.
And so a question as far as what do you do to assess for malingering is a gotcha moment?
It could be. I don't know. I don't know what your agenda is.
And I actually told you what my agenda was, right? I told you I just wanted to understand your report and get to the truth. I actually told you that, correct?
Correct.
And your response to me was, if you have questions about my report, you can ask me in court when I testify, correct?
Correct. And that you could read my report.
Oh, yes, of course. I just can't ask you about your report, correct?
Correct.
And then I asked you if you spoke with Mr. Willis, and you said yes, correct?
Correct.
And your response to that was basically that that was because you were retained by Mr. Willis, so that's why you spoke with him.
Correct. I have a contract.
And then I asked you, so Mr. Willis paid you, so you'll speak with him, but because I didn't pay you, you won't speak with me. And your response was verbatim, they paid me for my opinion, correct?
Correct. And I misspoke because the reality of that is that I was not paid for my opinion. I'm paid for my time.
But that's not what you told me over the phone, correct?
That's correct, but it was a complete misspeak.
Okay. So I want to talk to you about your opinion that they paid you for. In your report, you list out the things that you reviewed aside from speaking with the defendant as part of the case file. I know we talked about some of them. For example, you read the police reports.
That's correct.
Do you know if you were given the entirety of the Hall County Police report?
What I have is about 50 pages.
So if there's a report that has more pages, you wouldn't have that?
Correct.
And then you also indicated that you watched 3 hours of body cam, right?
That's correct.
And in your report, and I genuinely don't know the answer to this, you said that you reviewed video footage and written transcript of interview, and that only took you 1 hour, correct?
That it seemed like it was an hour of footage.
Did you watch the entirety of the 3-hour interview with the defendant and investigator Mefford?
I did not think it was 3 hours. I thought it was 1.
So when you hit start on the interview, and the interview runs for 3 hours, at what point did you just stop watching the interview?
Well, I watched it. I don't know if I looked at the timestamps incorrectly. I also read the entirety of the transcript, so I don't think I missed anything.
So did you, because I was genuinely confused about that because the interview was 3 hours long. So did you sit down and watch from start to finish the interview that the defendant had with investigator Mefford?
I thought I had, because I thought it started when Ms. Mericle walks into the room and concludes with him saying she didn't make it. Or he didn't make it, I'm sorry.
Okay, so that interview was about 3 hours long. And you think that it only took you an hour to watch?
I suppose I misread the timestamps.
Okay. And then you also reviewed Hall County Jail medical and mental health records, right?
That's correct.
And text messages between the 4,000 pages of text messages between the defendant and the victim, correct?
That's correct.
Did you ever, and I know you interviewed the defendant's 2 sisters, did you ever interview anybody else who knew the defendant?
No.
Did you ever interview anyone from Mr. Barron's family?
No.
I actually want to ask you this. I know that part of your qualification, you talked a lot about conducting forensic examinations, like for people who are claiming not guilty by reason of insanity, correct?
That's correct.
And I'm very familiar with those evaluations. And so one of the things that I know is very important in those evaluations is basically when you're trying to determine whether or not someone is not guilty by reason of insanity, it's important to look at the objective facts about the case, not just what that individual is self-reporting to you, correct?
That's correct.
Because, of course, that individual, not talking about lying about symptoms, but lying about, like, stories that they experience could potentially lie, correct?
Can you say that again?
Yeah, so I'm not, when I say lying, I don't mean lying about symptoms that they're having. I mean lying about, like, if they said, I walked my dog yesterday, like, they could lie about that, correct?
So in those kinds of cases, we're looking at mental state at the time of the offense. Mm-hmm. So the collateral data that we're looking at is anything that would be going on at that exact time.
Sure, and that's why, like, the objective facts are so important to figure out what was going on at that exact time, just because anybody can say, at that time I saw a ghost walking across the street who told me to kill this person. They can say that, but then you want to look at the objective facts to see what makes sense with what they're saying, correct?
Correct.
And that it's important not to just rely on self-report. You want to also be looking at, like, the objective evidence, the objective facts that can't be lied about.
Correct.
Essentially. So in this case, did you call investigator Mefford and speak with him to get an understanding about this case?
No.
Did you call Sergeant Cameron Durham to get a better understanding about the crime scene in this case?
No.
Did you get medical records pertaining to Miss Mericle to validate any of the things she was telling you about her medical past?
Whatever was available, I had.
So, for example, like, Ms. Mericle talked about surgeries and different hospitalizations she had had. Did you pull any of those medical records to confirm that those things did in fact happen?
No, but her sisters corroborated that those things occurred.
Her two sisters did.
Correct.
What about, Ms. Mericle told you that she had seen a bunch of different therapists in her past,
Yes.
correct? She even gave you like the specific name of at least one that I know of, correct?
Yes.
Did you reach out to any of them, get any other prior mental health records?
I tried. I couldn't track them down.
Even though she gave you the name of the
Yes.
actual therapist?
Yes.
Okay. So you didn't get any prior mental health records of the defendant, correct?
Correct.
The only mental health records you had were mental health records from the jail, correct?
That's correct.
And that would be after Miss Mericle had killed Mr. Barron, correct?
That's correct.
So we have no mental health records from what Miss Miracle's mental health was like prior to meeting Mr. Barron, correct?
That's correct.
To be able to compare whether or not these symptoms of PTSD potentially existed prior to even knowing Mr. Barron, correct?
That's correct.
You didn't think that would be an important thing for you to get, would be prior mental health records to make sure that these symptoms of PTSD did not exist prior to her knowing Mr. Barron?
So the symptoms of PTSD that she reported to me were directly related to the trauma that involved Mr. Barron,
According to her, correct?
according to her, but it's the kind of thing that she couldn't have made up.
Why is that?
Because so much of what she said was spontaneous. It wasn't like I asked her specifically, are you having nightmares about this thing? I said, how's your sleep? And she spontaneously said that, and that's not something that someone would typically make up.
And she reported to you that the most severe, I forget exactly what you called it, like the most severe thing that she was having a trauma response to was the night of March 7th where he put the gun to her mouth, correct?
That's correct.
And that is entirely self-report, correct?
Yes, but she says it a lot of times, and she says it before she's even asked about it.
And she's being evaluated by you for her criminal case where she's being charged with murdering Mr. Barron, correct?
Correct.
Did you look at any photographs from the crime scene?
No.
Did you look at the defendant's phone for any other text messages between her and anybody else in her phone to corroborate some of the things that she was telling you?
There were text messages between her and Mr. English that came up.
Okay. Anybody else?
No.
Okay. So, when you met with Ms. Mericle, one of the very first things you did was basically told her, our relationship is not confidential. Whatever you tell me, basically is likely or could be used in court, right?
That's correct.
And so when you went into that interview, you knew that all of these interviews that you were having with the defendant could potentially be talked about in court.
That's correct.
Did you record any of the meetings you had with the defendant?
That's not allowed.
It's not allowed?
No.
So I've had psychological evaluations before with criminal defendants who have been recorded in interviews by evaluators.
Objection to counsel testifying.
And so
Objection to counsel.
I haven't gotten to my question yet.
Still object to this, to the form of the question.
Okay. Let's hear the question.
Is your testimony that evaluators are never allowed to record an interview that they conduct with the defendant?
Well, if it's in an outpatient setting, but this was in a jail, and I don't bring my phone into a jail.
Did you ask the jail if you could record your interviews with the defendant for the purposes of court?
No.
So, Ms. Mericle told you that Mr. Barron had been drinking Jack Daniels and beer the night of March 7th, correct?
Yes.
And that she reported to you that both of them had been drinking, but no one was drinking. Both of them pretty much stopped drinking around 10:30, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. you this before I forget. You mentioned that Miss Mericle told you that she had thoughts or had attempted suicide the night of March 7th.
She said she thought about it.
She thought about committing suicide. Can you point to me where you note that in your report?
Did I not put it in?
I don't see it. I don't want to say you didn't put it in because I could have just missed it. So if you don't mind reviewing your report and showing me where you put in your report that she thought about committing suicide.
I'm not sure that I put it in.
You don't think that would have been an important thing to note in your report, that on the night where Miss Mericle killed her boyfriend, that she had a thought about committing suicide?
It wasn't really significant to a PTSD diagnosis, so I must have omitted it.
You don't think it's significant that the defendant told you that on the night that she killed her boyfriend, she had thought about committing suicide?
I think it's significant. I don't think it's consistent with a diagnosis of PTSD.
Okay. Did she go into detail about how did she actually attempt to commit suicide, or just that she thought about it?
Just that she thought about it.
Did she ever tell you that she actually attempted suicide?
No.
Did she tell you that she actually attempted suicide 5 different times?
No.
In your report, you note that I think it's your very first meeting with her, she told you that the very first time Mr. Barron pointed a gun at her was the night of March 7th. And then you, later on in your report, talk about other times where Mr. Barron pointed a gun at her. Do you remember that in your report?
It wasn't that he pointed a gun at her. That was the first time that he took a gun and pointed it in her face. That's not the first time that there was a gun involved in the argument.
Okay. So, like, for example, the night where she got the DUI, the night of December 28th, when she found out about Lilia and there was a gun involved, did she explain to you how the gun was involved that night?
Just that he was brandishing it.
Well, did she say what she meant by brandishing?
Like, had it out.
Okay. But, like, did she ever specifically say whether he did or didn't point it at her?
No.
Okay. So, I want to talk to you about the text messages. It was about 4,000 pages, right?
Yes.
Lots of pages of text messages.
Yes.
Between the two of them. So, did you see in that 4,000 pages a text where Mr. Barron is calling Miss Mericle a bad name?
I would need to go back through all the text messages.
If you had noted where Mr. Barron was calling the defendant a bad name, would that not have been something important to note in your report as far as abusive behavior?
Yes, it would.
And so if it's not noted in your report, is it safe to say that there likely is not any bad names being called in those 4,000 pages of notes by Mr. Barron to the defendant?
I would need to go back through all the text messages to answer this question properly.
Well, but again, you said that if there had been any evidence of name calling in those text messages, it would have been important for you to note in your report, correct?
Correct.
And is there any note in your report of Mr. Barron calling the defendant any bad names in your report?
Not via text message.
Okay. So, what about, you mentioned the evidence of physical violence in text messages. I know that one of the examples you gave was when he threw her purse out the window of the car, correct?
Correct.
And the other example I think you gave in your report, you might have also testified to it, was when Mr. Barron asks, "Is your head okay?" after the St. Simon's incident, correct?
Correct.
Can you think of any other examples of the two of them talking about physical abuse in any way in those text messages?
No.
You testified that Miss Mericle wanting to, of course, we see all the time where, people can be sexually abused by their husbands, their boyfriends, correct?
Correct.
And they can still be in a later on consensual relationship with them. That doesn't mean that they haven't been previously sexually abused by them, correct?
That's correct.
And so you talked about how someone who's been sexually abused by a significant other basically can show one of two things. Do you remember talking about this?
I do.
That either they basically avoid sex at all costs or over-sexualized.
Yes.
And that either one of those could be consistent with someone being sexually abused by a domestic partner, correct?
That's correct.
Someone wanting to sext their boyfriend does not mean that they were sexually abused by that individual automatically, correct?
Not automatically, but it's inconclusive, right?
Sure. So basically, when you see an individual sexting the person that they're in a relationship with, it's not an automatic, they must have been sexually abused by them. It could also just be because they want to have a sexual texting conversation with their significant other, correct?
That's correct.
Same with, for example, the note about the DUI on her phone that you testified about. And you said, that could be consistent with a domestic violence victim basically writing out a script so that they remember it, correct?
That's correct.
Could that not also be consistent with somebody writing out what happened to them so they don't forget to tell their attorney?
Yeah, that's entirely possible. It's not my opinion, but it's
Sure.
entirely possible.
But it's entirely possible.
Yes.
Especially if she has a pending DUI arrest. It would not be out of the realm of possibility that she wrote down what happened to her so that she could remember to have that conversation with her DUI attorney, correct?
It's possible. It remains my opinion that was a rehearsal.
Sure. And then the other example that you gave that I wrote down was when she texted Mr. Barron and said, "I fell on my head, you did nothing wrong," and you gave that as another example of something that would be consistent with basically a rehearsed response, correct?
That's correct.
And I understand that's going to remain your opinion, but couldn't it also be possible that that's just actually what happened?
Not in this case. Not in this case. Not based on what I saw on the body camera footage. She was clearly signaling to the police that something bad had happened by using no words and putting the police officer's hand on her head without saying anything. It's so clear that something happened.
And something did happen. She did injure her head. No one is saying that she did not injure her head, correct?
That's correct.
It's just how she injured her head is really the question here.
It is, but there's no explanation other than something really bad was going on, and then she immediately recanted and said, everything's fine, nothing's going on. He was sitting in the next room, so she wasn't going to say anything was going on. So that text message to me was so obviously a rehearsal, in my opinion.
As far as the text messages, you would agree that when Miss Mericle gets angry, most of the time Mr. Barron will just stop replying to text messages, correct?
That's correct.
And basically the argument will result in the defendant essentially kind of having an argument with herself.
Correct.
And then at some point she just kind of gives up on this argument with herself, and then Mr. Barron will reply when the argument with herself is completed.
Well, that's not entirely correct. What happens in these text messages is that she initially is angry about something. She's angry, she's trying to express herself, and he doesn't respond. And in those cases, silence is a manipulative tool that he's using because she is so self-doubting that she's now second-guessing herself. She's like, well, maybe it was my fault. And she becomes solicitous. And that's when he responds.
So that confuses me a little bit because you're saying that Mr. Barron not replying is manipulative, correct?
That's correct, using silence as a manipulative tool.
But could it not also just mean that he doesn't want to engage when she's speaking with him that way?
Well, in the broader context of a relationship, this is how abusers assert power, is that they just don't respond until the victim comes back with, I'm sorry, it was my fault, and in Ms. Mericle's case, solicitous of sex.
Couldn't an abuser also respond by using manipulative words?
They could.
Like, for example, you said that in a relationship in the beginning, everything is great, but you know when things are starting to go south in an abusive relationship because of the verbal and emotional abuse, correct?
That's correct.
So it sounds like an abuser can abuse by both being verbal and not speaking at all?
Sure.
So what is, it sounds like everything is consistent with someone being an abuser then, is what you're saying, correct?
Well, in this case, I mean, as I said, relationships are messy, and any of this could have happened. I mean, what we see in the text messages is the use of silence. And it's equally as possible that not in text messages, he was really mean to her. That's what the report is.
So Mr. Barron not replying is abusive, but would your opinion be the same if Mr. Barron had replied saying, you know, calling her names, you whore, you know, I'm going to kill you if you ever say that again? Would your testimony be that that is also abusive?
Sure.
So, okay. You would agree that after December 28th, almost exclusively, or if not the vast majority of fights that Mr. Barron and the defendant have over text message are involving Lilia, correct?
That's correct.
And I would say, I feel like I can confidently ask you, all of them are started by the defendant, correct?
That's correct.
And the defendant is calling Mr. Barron names, correct?
Yes.
And there's actually a photograph where there's physical abuse by the defendant to Mr. Barron, correct?
That was part of the early February
Yes,
incident.
yes.
Yes, where he had like a little scratch on his face. Is that what you're referring to? Yes.
She's calling him names. You would agree that lying about vomiting in the ER to get him to come take care of her is manipulative, correct?
It's solicitous, yes.
What's the difference between solicitous and manipulative?
That she is doing things to gain his attention.
Correct, okay. In your report, you put in there that Mr. Barron inadvertently found out about a medical issue that Ms. Mericle was having and offered to drive to St. Simon's to help, and that Ms. Mericle accepted this invitation, correct?
That's correct.
Have you since been made aware that that was, none of that was true?
No, I didn't know that.
So, do you remember reading the text messages where Ms. Mericle talked about how she was vomiting up blood, correct?
Yes.
And that she sent that text saying, Jen, can you take me to the hospital, correct?
Yes.
And that she said she spent the whole day in the ER. Do you remember all those text messages?
Yes.
And if I told you that Ms. Mericle said that all of that was false and none of that was true and it was all a lie, would you say that that was Ms. Mericle manipulating Mr. Barron to feel sorry for her?
It was certainly attention-seeking.
When you read those text messages, did you think it would be important to validate that any of the defendant's medical issues that she was talking about in those text messages?
I didn't think so.
text messages about the St. Simon's incident when the defendant texted Mr. Barron that the police came back the next day and basically told her, we wished we had arrested Mr. Barron. Do you
Yes.
remember those?
Yes.
Do you know if that was true or false?
I found out yesterday that that was not true.
But that was in your report. That was something that you found important as part of your opinion to put in your report, correct? It was important enough for you to put in your report.
Yes.
How about the male friend? Do you remember the text about the male friend that was going to come and basically buy Mr. Barron out of the lake house? Do you remember those text messages?
Yes. Or he was going to help her move out.
Yes. Well, that's what you put in your report. Do you know if that was true or false?
I don't.
Okay. I want to talk to you about the DUI. I know that you had the jail medical records and the jail mental health records, correct?
That's correct.
Part of your report that you note was the night of March 7th when you noted that the jail nurse saw bruising on her arms, and you note in your report like the bruising that the jail nurse saw on her arms on March 7th, correct?
That's correct.
Did you have the jail intake form for the night of February 16th?
I did.
Did you notice on the jail intake form that there was no bruising noted by the jail nurse?
I did.
Did you not find that to be significant?
No, because the bruising that Ms. Mericle was reporting was not in anywhere visible.
Did you call the jail to confirm whether or not the jail nurse looked at Ms. Mericle's breasts or had her dress out, anything like that?
Well, I know she didn't dress out
Why?
because I know she bonded out.
So, again, did you call the jail to confirm that they did not look at her chest for any visible bruising?
I did not.
Also in the jail medical records, Ms. Mericle was speaking with like a jail psychologist or psychiatrist, correct?
That's correct.
And I would say there's a big quantity of these records where what Ms. Mericle is most concerned about and has the most depression about is her current status incarcerated in the jail, correct?
That's correct.
And there's constant discussion of her depression as it relates to her current status as an inmate, correct?
That's correct.
And how, let me see.
Judge, I have an objection. I think we need approach.
You mentioned on direct that.
Hold on.
Oh, I'm so sorry, Judge.
Nope, that's fine. It's 6:05. I gotta be honest, I mean, and no disrespect to anyone, I don't know how long this witness is gonna go for. So we can call it a day or we can keep going. It's 6:05. I get the nonverbal cue that we're gonna call it a day and come back tomorrow. Is that, or do you wanna keep going? Come back tomorrow. Okay. Okay, we'll take a break in the action. Again, please don't discuss the case with anyone and don't do any research. We'll see you tomorrow. Same situation, 8:45, 9 o'clock. Thank you. Lawyers remain. I would anticipate we'll have some lawyer business to deal with. still an open court. If you want to hang out, great. If not, that's fine also. Y'all can sit, stand, that's fine with me. What I'd like to do is, clearly we're coming back tomorrow. Clearly it's going to be